I'm Billy S, welcome back to the channel. Last month we looked at Oracle of Seasons, this month we're looking at Oracle of Ages, as I rank every boss from worst to best. Like the Seasons video, this will include all bosses and mini-bosses the game has to offer, and as this was the second of the two games I played, I'm also including Twinrova and Ganon's fights on today's list. So let's jump right in. Every boss in the Legend of Zelda Oracle of Ages, ranked. Let me know your favourites down below. At number 20, we have the Anglerfish, the mini-boss of Jabu Jabu's Belly. For being the 7th dungeon in the game, you'd expect the mini-bosses to ramp up in difficulty, and yet the Anglerfish remains so simple in the face of your toolkit. You need to fire scent seeds at the bouncing fish with your seed shooter, which will cause it to deflate and fall to the ground, allowing you to attack it with your sword. It can fire bubbles at Link, which you can break to replenish your seeds, and it can bounce into you to deal contact damage. We've seen bosses at this point who have utilized the seed shooter in really interesting ways, so getting a mini-boss that doesn't do anything remotely new with the power-up just makes the fight feel very redundant. And in a dungeon that is extremely non-linear and easy to get lost in, the fight ends up taking a back seat to everything else. It really was an afterthought. At number 19, we have Subterra, the mini-boss of the Moonlit Grotto. This mole digs underground and attempts to chase you through the sand, bursting forth with his drill-like nose to deal contact damage. The way to beat him is very straightforward. Equip the shovel and dig up the ground where he's moving to shovel him onto the surface so you can attack him. He's a little more dangerous than our previous entry, with more erratic movements, but at least he has an excuse for being one of the simpler fights in the game, as he's in the 3rd dungeon. I wonder if he inspired Mogriff's design from Echoes of Wisdom. It's not the first thing that game borrowed from Oracle of Ages, as we'll soon see. At number 18, we have the Great Moblin, found in the Great Moblin's Keep at Rolling Ridge. A slightly different fight to his Seasons counterpart, though the solution remains similar. You have to avoid the smaller bombs thrown by his minions and send the big bomb back at him. But you have to time it so that the big bomb explodes when it lands on the Great Moblin, otherwise he just picks it up and throws it back. While fun initially, I ended up struggling immensely with the last hit you needed to make, as the smaller moblins were annoyingly accurate and the timings just never aligned. It honestly felt like luck that I came out on top in this hectic explosive brawl, and it just wasn't really my cup of tea. At number 17, we have the Great Genie, the mini-boss of the Spirit's Grave. Despite the low placement, this is the first mini-boss in the game I really like the mechanics of. The Great Guinea will summon multiple small spirits to chase the player. You can kill them with your sword if you're a better player than me, otherwise they'll hit you and cause you to slow down, thus allowing the main spirit to crash into you for contact damage. It's a simple premise for a very simple fight, but works incredibly well. I like the idea of Link being hit by debuffs that force the player to be more careful in the future, and I'm surprised this slow movement combat wasn't adopted at all for Seasons. Great Genie goes down quickly, but he puts up a nice surprise fight. At number 16, we have Pumpkinhead, the boss of the Spirit's Grave. Bagged on as one of the easiest fights in the series, with one of the goofiest designs we've ever seen. I can't hate this guy. He's a silly scarecrow pumpkin man, and I love that Halloween realness. He walks around the room menacingly, and will either fire 3 fireballs at Link, which is reminiscent of the Aquamentus boss in Seasons, or he'll try to smash Link by jumping to his location multiple times. You have to hit the body until the pumpkin falls to the floor, then lift up the gourd to reveal the true enemy, a simple baby spirit, your target. You can attack it until it repossesses the pumpkin, upon which you rinse and repeat until the boss is down. A simple premise. I'd argue this fight could have used the Great Genie mechanic to make it easier for Pumpkinhead to hit the player. I only almost died because I'm inherently bad at contact damage in these games, so take that for what you will. At number 15, we have Swoop, the mini-boss of the Wing Dungeon. A simple fight with a fun little premise, Swoop will fly into the air and attempt to crush Link by smashing into the ground. except every tile he smashes will break, revealing a bottomless pit beneath. The aim is to kill the boss quickly so that you don't run out of space and go plummeting to your doom, though the blue tiles that decorate the sides of the room are impervious to damage, so you can use them to mitigate the challenge. Just don't hesitate when Swoop hits the ground, because he's only vulnerable for an extremely brief period of time, but if you can capitalize and even get a spin attack off, you're good. At number 14, we have Via, the mini-boss of the Mermaid's Cave. Exactly the same as his fight in Seasons, Via will attempt to fly around the room and fireball the player from afar. If you look too closely at him, he'll fly away, forcing you to look away from him so he'll come back close. It's a fight that drags on a little too much and just had me circling the room over and over, avoiding blue flames so I could win. It just didn't appeal to me all that much the second time around. Do love that he calls you a bully though. More Zelda villains should resort to playground remarks when losing. At number 13, we have Blue Stalfos, the mini-boss of the Ancient Tomb. Despite having a really cool design with the scythe and the billowing blue cape, I can't help but feel really disappointed here. Blue Stalfos can attack you with his scythe, but it's not given a proper fun moveset. Instead, the focus is on his magic, and you guessed it, it's the same Aghanim orb attacks from A Link to the Past. Dodge the weird-looking one, hit back the orb one, attack the Blue Stalfos when it turns into a bat, rinse, and repeat. Had we gotten a cool scythe-based moveset to go along with the magic, this could have been a really fun fight. Have the scythe swinging around the room like a boomerang or something. It's a real shame when I think about Seasons and how Frypolar managed to nail the final mini-boss section so much better. At number 12, we have Plasmarine, the boss of Jabu Jabu's Belly. This is a giant version of those red and blue jellyfish enemies we see throughout the 2D Zelda games. And while I was a little fearful at first, as it's the 7th boss in the game, it is woefully simple. Plasmarine will either attempt to dash into the player, releasing an electric barrier that does contact damage, or they'll try to shoot the player with energy balls. And the solution is to use the switch hook to swap places with the boss, changing its color, so that it then takes damage from the energy ball it just shot. Nothing is elaborated upon further, it's just do that 7 times and you come out victorious. I like the usage of the switch hook, I like that this boss has a concept, but they needed to take it 2 steps further to really get the most out of Plasmarine. At number 11, we have Armos Warrior, the mini-boss of the Skull Dungeon. Despite being a fairly easy fight overall, I had a lot of fun with this guy. He starts with a massive sword and shield, where he'll begin the fight by throwing the sword at Link, and using his powers to make it follow him around the room. This is a Goku versus Frieza moment, where you have to make it so the sword slams back into the boss. Do this 3 times and the sword and shield explode. It's not terribly in-depth, but I really like the way the fight is set up, and the sword following you around the room is a neat touch. The second phase is just dodge the Armos Warrior, let him slam into a wall and sword strike him until he dies. It's the first half that got him this high on the list. At number 10, we have the Head Thwomp, the boss of the Wing Dungeon. A rare side-scrolling fight, your aim is to throw bombs into the hole atop his head, and depending on the colour he lands on after he stops spinning, determines what happens next. Green will cause him to throw fireballs that you need to avoid, blue will cause him to fire orbs in a circular pattern, purple will cause him to smash into the ground, causing boulders to fall from above, and red will cause you to subscribe to the channel. We're trying to reach 30,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and you might be able to help out. Or consider becoming a channel member. It's $4.99 a month, you get early access to future videos, a shout out in the description, and at the end of the video as well. Red actually means that he takes damage, and doing this 4 times defeats the boss. He's only at a 10 on this list, despite the fun gambling concept, because it is entirely luck-based whether you get a good cycle. The colour he's facing towards you when the bomb lands inside his head will be the colour that appears after he's done spinning, so sometimes it's just hard to line up your shots with the red face. Still, a good representation of the more puzzle-focused nature of Age's boss fights. At number 9, we have Smasher, the mini-boss of the Crown Dungeon, and my favourite in the game. Smasher returns from Link's Awakening with the same overall premise: grab the ball it throws your way and use it to strike the boss. In Link's Awakening, you could really break the fight by constantly picking up the ball, but here it will vanish after being thrown, which means neither Link nor the Smasher are able to hoard it. It creates a really fun dodgeball session where you have to position yourself just right and get the best throws to come out on top. I just like the concept, and the fact it's fairer than in Link's Awakening makes it a more compelling fight in my eyes. At number 8, we have Eyesore, the boss of the Skull Dungeon, and a clear homage to the Patra enemy from the original Legend of Zelda. Here you have to avoid Eyesore and his 4 smaller eyes, with the goal being to shoot the switch hook so that you swap places with the main boss. This confuses it, causing it to fall to the floor, allowing you to do damage. The challenge comes from the smaller eyes that float around the boss, as there's no way to actually kill them. They respawn near immediately after death, which I didn't realize until midway through my fight, so there's a lot of my footage where I'm just trying to kill those small things and they just keep respawning and I'm just confused. It's a more interesting use of the switch hook to me than Plasmarine, but the oppressive nature of the boss's patterns and those smaller-eyed enemies presents a difficulty I found a little bit too much during my playthrough. At number 7, we have the Shadow Hag, the boss of the Moonlit Grotto. This Witch of the Dark Arts has the ability to turn into shadow, which means Link can never truly perceive her, as a shadow always remains behind the light. She can launch 4 small shadows along the floor to chase Link, before forming into a certain spot in the room. She can fire a few butterflies at you, which you can kill to restock on seeds, which is important as the only way to damage her is with your newly acquired seed shooter. Face away from her, fire at the wall in front of you, and the seed will bounce backwards and hit behind you, because looking at her causes her to shrink into shadow form, so by Medusering her ass, you take her down. It's a surprising amount of depth for the third boss, and is a great way to incorporate the new seed shooter into the boss fight, which gets a lot of use throughout the rest of the game. At number 6, we have Twin Rover, the first part of the final battle in the Room of Rights. I'm ranking them separately from Ganon for funsies, even though they're all part of one big boss package. That's just how I do things. Gotta be honest, I was not very good at fighting these two, and you'll be able to tell from the footage. They start off as Kum and Katake, 2 separate witches who fly around the room trying to shoot you with their given element. You have to knock their element into the opposing sister to do damage, which I just found really difficult and tedious. It wasn't that fun in a 2D setting. When they form into Twin Rover, the fight is way better though. They'll alternate between 2 different forms of fire and ice. In fire form, the room always has lava pits you need to avoid, while the ice room has slippery physics. And I fell into the lava more than I care to admit, because when you hit Twin Rover, it does cause knockback. You need to damage her enough while avoiding her various icy and fiery attacks until she begins to split apart, upon which you fire mystery seeds until she goes down. Ice form was the easier to handle, but the real challenge came from making sure I had enough health after defeating Twin Rover to handle the upcoming Ganon fight right after. That's where I struggled. As in 2D Zelda, I'm a dumbass. I'll just hit things until they die without much regard for positioning, and that is entirely on me. At number 5, we have Smog, the boss of the Crown Dungeon. How fitting, last month I ranked Smog as part of Echoes of Wisdom, and now we're back where it started with Smog in Oracle of Ages. Smog will split apart into smaller fragments, with you needing to use the Cane of Samaria to create blocks that will ultimately cause the Smogs to collide with each other. This creates the main boss, which you can then smack with your sword to trigger the next puzzle. With just one block, you have to really think outside the box to bring Smog to boil, all the while avoiding gusty blue wind clouds and electricity upon his reforming. I love the moments where the action pauses, Link is lifted up, and the music stops so Smog can set up his next puzzle like a dungeon master getting the miniatures ready. It's really charming, and I'm just so happy this boss got a return in Echoes of Wisdom. It was the perfect time to bring him back. At number 4, we have Octagon, the boss of the Mermaid's Cave. A really fun fight that uses 2 different planes to create a memorable encounter. Octagon starts above the water, where he'll circle the middle platform trying to shoot Link with various rocks. You need to use your seed shooter to fire seeds in such a way that they bounce off the corners of the wall and hit Octagon's hidden face. What's fun is do enough damage above water, and then you can dive underneath the water to hit Octagon for even more pain. Staying underwater does have risks of attacks coming from above, but in my playthrough I stayed above water for my run most of the time and had a good experience. Between this and Shadow Hag, they really found a way to make the seed shooter memorable, and I'm glad it exists. Physics puzzles never felt so good, and making calamari never felt so tasty. At number 3, we have Veren, Sorceress of Shadow. Technically, we fight her twice in the game, once at the midpoint where we face possessed Nehru, and using the switch hook and some mystery seeds, we're able to free her from danger. This fight is then repeated at the end of the game when she possesses Queen Ambi. Get through this simple challenge and she'll change into a demonic creature, summoning Dark Link mimics you need to kill lest they get in the way. This phase is simple, hit her as she drives by while avoiding the projectiles, and if you do this enough, you win the fight. Except as you're escaping, she drags you back in to face her true, despised form. Here, she can transform into 3 different animals: a turtle, which she uses to slam into the ground where you're standing, a spider, which you have to use bombs to stun her with, so you can get quick damage, and a giant bee, which does a figure of 8 spin across the arena you've got to attack as she moves past. Deal with these, and Veren eventually goes down. She's not as threatening looking as Onox from Seasons, but I actually think her fight has far more depth to it overall, and she's just a more interesting villain. Where Onox is gone the whole game, she's present throughout the story, and I think that adds to her final showdown. At number 2, we have Ganon, the final boss of a linked game in the Room of Rights. You face him after Twin Rover, which means you won't be on full health and you'll have less resources available to you, but I just find the novelties of facing down Ganon on the Game Boy really cool. Even if he is a mindless killing machine, he'll teleport around the room as this form of Ganon always likes to do, and he has a couple of different moves he can break out. The simplest is a trident slash you can Rock's Feather away from, there's a trio of magic orbs you can jump over to avoid. He might appear in the room's center and cast magic from his trident that explodes in all directions, and at low health he'll cause the room to turn a bright blue, reversing your controls until the effect is done. He's not terribly hard compared to the Twin Rover fight, but I'm honestly okay with that. I love how big his sprite is, how imposing he feels, and yet they didn't go overboard with his boss fight like they could have, which is just relieving. Maybe Veren could overtake Ganon on a good day, but even the King of Evil has nothing on our number 1. At number 1, we have Ramrock, the boss of the Ancient Tomb. It's a floating head with hands, Nintendo's favorite gimmick from the early 2000s, but this one's fun. Ramrock has 4 different phases to its fight, all of which are sufficiently different in a way that makes him feel like a 3D Zelda boss. For the first part of the fight, you need to knock back Ramrock's hands that he launches your way, so they bounce back into the boss, which will damage him enough to where he'll summon 2 new hands with spikes. He then begins chasing you around the room, and you need to get him to crush a series of bombs within his hands to damage him. You can do this as he stops in the middle of the room to open his hands, which is a simple enough challenge. Phase 3, he gains the power of lasers and giant shields, which forces you, the player, to take the same approach you did with Octagon. Fire seeds at the walls so that they bounce behind the boss and damage him. Do this enough while avoiding his lasers, and the final phase begins. He summons 2 giant balls, and you need to bait him into firing at you with one of them, then grab the other ball he didn't use and pull it taut. Once you let go, it'll smack into his face, and doing this 3 times finishes the job. That's so much for a 2D Zelda boss. To be blunt, not a single fight in Ages or Seasons comes remotely close to just how in-depth Ramrock was, and it's for that reason he earns the number 1 spot. And that's my list. Which Oracle of Ages boss is your favorite? Let me know down below, and be sure to parry that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all my future content. Next week we'll have the Dungeons video on Ages, and then after that I'll have to start recording Wind Waker. Oh boy. A massive shout out to my YouTube channel members who have just appeared on screen now. You can see them on the left there, and if you want to join them, it is $4.99 a month. There are links down below if you're interested. My social medias are also on screen now on the right. If you want to follow me anywhere, I would recommend my Blue Sky. To be perfectly honest, I don't really want to be active on Twitter anymore. It's going to be a cesspit, and I'm not that active in my Discord, but Blue Sky, it's fun there. So thanks everyone for watching, I'll see you next time, adios.